reservation, if you remember. Golly, what were those? Reservation scalper was one of them. Indian giver was one of them. I mean, you get the idea on this. And then let's go back to the articles. And I'll be fairly brief with these because I know that we're coming up on time a little bit here. But just looking at these civil rights articles really quick, there were a number of them that were in here. We did deal with the miscellaneous political correctness. And do y'all remember some of the other examples of things that you weren't supposed to say? Go ahead.
You can't call midgets midgets.
What word? You can't say the M word. And this was what interest group that actually challenged this? Little People of America had said that the M word was actually an offensive word. So as such, they wanted it to be banned, and they wanted the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, to maybe pull people's networks if in fact they allowed it. They compared the M word to what word? The N word. And they said the M word is as offensive to little people as in fact the N word would be to another pretty prominent group of people in the United States. They probably oversold their hand on this. They wanted to be referred to as LP or little people, but honestly, you know, this is where it gets difficult because if you remember when we were talking about civil rights, we're talking about group identification. So we're not talking about what we think is okay or what the majority thinks is okay, but we're talking about what each individual group thinks is okay. And what you see is that more and more groups are organizing and more groups want their rights protected. What other examples do you remember? Go ahead, Julian.
Department of Aging.
The Department of Aging. What was the problem with the Department of Aging? And what state was this? Do you remember?
No.
Anybody remember what state it was, Department of Aging? Iowa. What was the problem with Department of Aging?
DOA, and that means dead on arrival.
It's abbreviated, yeah. It was actually the Department of Elder Affairs, I believe, is what it was originally called, and they wanted to make it more politically correct, so they changed it to the Department of Aging, which means they were sending the older people to DOA, which is dead on arrival, and older people didn't take kindly to that. Go ahead.
Didn't we talk about like New York school, like standardized
What
tests?
were the words that they started to ban?
Dinosaur and birthday.
They banned dinosaur. They banned birthday. They banned dancing. They banned junk food. Some of these different kinds of words. And you know, birthday, probably religious reasons. Dancing, maybe religious reasons. Dinosaur, maybe religious reasons. Junk food, I guess for obesity reasons, I don't know. But you get the idea on this. They're basically saying if you're thinking about the words on a test and you don't agree with these, then you're not going to take the test as well. Take a look at these because we had talked about placing an ad for a roommate. If you remember with the Christians, we talked about brownies, Jean-Pierre's favorite, little cakes with lots of chocolate. But in fact, the term brownie could actually get you suspended, I believe, from school is what ultimately ended up happening. I mean, there were about 6 or 7 articles on there, so take a good look at those. What was the NBA dress code? Go ahead.
They couldn't wear like, raggedy like sweatpants and like.
Raggedy sweatpants.
Oh, and chains the approximate weight of a small child.
Gaudy chains with gaudy pendants, the approximate size and weight of a small child. Leonard Pitts was the writer of this. And if you go back and you read this article, he's basically saying in there, and the NBA decided to come up with a dress code. And if you remember in all the classes I had asked y'all where you work, what your dress code was, how the dress code worked, you know, what it basically said. And the basic gist of this is that the NBA, as a multi-billion-dollar industry, wanted to kind of protect or maybe professionalize its brand. Now these players, probably because there are fewer NBA players than really any other sport when you think about it, because there's only like 14 guys a team. In the big picture of things, they kind of wanted to protect their brand. I mean, they wear a uniform on the court. This dress code was basically dealing with what? When did they have to wear? Go ahead.
On a business related situations?
Any NBA business related situation. So if you're talking about travel, if you're talking about pre-game interviews, if you're talking about post-game interviews, anytime you would be representing the team. And it was business casual and it listed some things that it banned. We talked about the raggedy sweatpants. Baggy sweats, I think is what it said. Do-rags, sleeveless tees, caps cocked to the side. Lindsay, can you cock your hat really quick? And he'll film you.
No, because my ponytail's going through.
Okay, all right. We don't want to hurt the ponytail. Okay, so with that in mind, but basically, and then of course the chains, there were several. Take a look at that list to make sure that you're comfortable with those. The players basically said that this was discriminatory. Why? Go ahead, Dante.
You basically just saying like anything. If you're black, you just can't wear what you want. Basically, like you got to do rags. And black people do rags.
There's an insinuation out there that this is targeting a particular group. And not only is it targeting a particular group, but the dominant group in the NBA in terms of numbers. And some of the players said that this was especially bad because it was discriminatory and it was imposed. They didn't get a chance to really talk about this or debate it. Others said, listen, you need to dress professional. I mean, this is good for business. It's good for you. Ultimately, this is what you need to do. What ultimately kind of settled this?
Didn't come any.
What's that?
Got paid to dress.
Who paid them?
Players, or the NBA played.
The NBA paid them? They wanted the NBA to pay them, but did the NBA? Go ahead.
Was it endorsements?
Endorsements. Clothes companies stepped in. Marcus Camby was one of the ones that said, hey, listen, if you want, and of course Marcus Camby, I think it said in there, made like $8 million a year, which is low by current NBA standards. But Marcus Camby said, listen, if you want me to dress up, you need to give me a clothing allowance, which didn't go over particularly well. But the trick on this was that ultimately clothing companies stepped in, and I had mentioned to you all about Russell Westbrook and Dwight Howard and some of these other things. They're getting paid for doing this. They're having a lot more fun with it now, and in fact, it's taken over. What would have made this dress code far less discriminatory? What would have made this dress code seem far less racist? They made a list of things that you couldn't wear. What should they have done? Go ahead.
They made a list of things that you could wear.
If you would have just made a list of the things that you're supposed to wear, then all of a sudden you wouldn't have been targeting other groups seemingly like that. So yeah, that's that. And then Surgeon General, take a good look at this one. Who was that Surgeon General?
Dr. Benjamin.
Regina Benjamin was. And what was the problem? Do you know?
She was obese.
She was visibly obese. And there was an argument out there about whether or not somebody being visibly obese representing the #1 health issue in the United States should actually be the #1 person representing health for the United States government as being the Surgeon General. So take a good look at that. Chapter 11, and I'll be fairly quick with this. This is actually the big one on the exam, so we're running a little bit late. But let's just start with some terms up here. What questions have y'all got from terms for Chapter 11? And bear with me as I pull these up. Anything at all?
Professor,
Yes.
I have a lot
Okay, go ahead.
characteristics of the house.
What are the characteristics of the House and the Senate? Because basically what I've said in all of the classes is an important theme for this chapter is going to be differences between the House and the Senate. Go ahead, Julia.
You want all of them?
You fire away and let's see what you got.
Okay, for the House, you have to be 25 years old. You have to be 7 years of being a U.S. citizen. It's 2 years elections and 435 members.
Yeah, so these are some basic differences. Age, residency, term, and what was the last one? Age, residency, term, and number of members. Go ahead. What does it say for the Senate?
A minimum of 30 years old, 9 years of being a U.S. citizen, 6-year terms, and 100 members.
So the basic idea is that they want people, the Senate and the House are supposed to be equal, but they want, the Senate is a little bit more prestigious. So they want them to be a little bit older so that they have a little bit more life experience. They want them to have a little bit of a higher residency requirement, again, so that they have a little bit more life experience as an American, but you do not have to have been born in the United States. If you go back to the terms, 2-year terms versus 6-year terms, how does that work in practice? Every 2 years, the entire 435 members of the House are elected. Why is that important? What does that mean?
They want to pass, like the policies passed. They want to go fast, and then the Senate kind of like stops them.
Yeah, the House is going to be more interested in moving, because almost as soon as they get elected, they got to start running for re-election. And the House, because it's 2-year elections, is going to be the most responsive to the popular will. So keep that in mind, the most responsive to the popular will. How does the Senate elections work with those 6-year terms? What's that?
Doesn't it slow down the process?
Well, it's supposed to slow down the process, but there's something even more basic than that. Every member of the House is elected every 2 years. How do the Senate elections work?
It's only a third of like the Senate
Every 2 years. 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3 every 2 years. So if you want to win a majority of the House, you can do that in one election. if you want to win a majority of the Senate, oftentimes you're going to have to win 2 elections. And to Aristides' point, because the terms are longer and because it's only 1/3 at a time, the Senate slows things down. And if you remember with George Washington, Washington had said that the passions of the House were like hot coffee, but the Senate was in fact like the saucer. When those hot passions spill out of the cup, they cool in the saucer. They settle there. The Senate is supposed to cool or calm the House down a little bit. Do you remember the difference, say, between treaties and appointments between the House and the Senate? Treaties and appointments. I think we just went over this on maybe Monday or Friday. Who is responsible for approving treaties and appointments? Only the Senate is. So when the president appoints someone, nominates Supreme Court justice, when the president nominates an ambassador or a cabinet member or a public minister or a consul, the idea is that that person has got to be approved by a majority of the United States Senate, and the House doesn't vote. If the president negotiates a treaty, then in fact it is only the United States Senate that will approve this. And even if the president negotiates something, if the Senate never approves it, the United States is not bound by it. Do y'all remember the example that I gave you of that? Treaty of Versailles, Jefferson said. The peace treaty of World War I is basically 100 years old, and the United States never ratified it. So we're not bound by it, even though President Wilson strongly negotiated for it. One more, and we didn't talk about this, but I can hit this one fairly quick right now. Impeachment. Understand, the House votes to impeach, and all you need is a simple majority of the House in order to impeach someone. And when you impeach someone, you are charging them with a crime. That's it. You're still innocent until proven guilty. You're charging them with a crime. In terms of impeachment, the Senate will try the impeachment. And the idea here is that oftentimes members of the House will go and they will actually act as attorneys before the Senate, arguing the charges of impeachment, and then you need a significant Senate majority, 2/3, in order to convict. And the thought is, a simple majority can charge somebody, but you would need some members of members of Republican and Democrats to get together to ultimately convict. President Clinton was impeached, and he was never convicted by the Senate. So kind of keep that in mind. What other questions have you got up here? Because we dealt with characteristics of House and Senate. Yes?
Article 1, Section 8 and Section 9.
What was Article 1, Section 8? One really quick word on this. Article 1, Section 8.
Enumerated powers.
Article 1, Section 8 actually deals with the powers of Congress. Powers. So if you want to know what Congress can do, go to Article 1, Section 8, and you'll find it. I probably am not going to ask you about enumerated and elastic powers, if you will, because we dealt with that on the last exam, but we did just talk about treaties and appointments. And you'll notice up here, Article 1, Section 9 deals with limits on the power of Congress. So, Bill of Attainder, remember what Bill of Attainder was? If a legislature actually declares you guilty of a crime, that is a bill of attainder, and that is not allowed because if you get to go to court, you have an attorney, you get to go to court, you have a chance to cross-examine witnesses against you, you have the ability to take your stand. You wouldn't have the ability to do that in terms of a legislature declaring you guilty. And then with ex post facto, we just did this the other day, this is talking about after the fact or retroactive laws. And take a good look at the sex offender article that was dealing, if you remember, with the residency requirements and things of that sort. So take a good look at that one. Looking at these terms, because I know we're coming up on time, what other questions have you got about terms down here? Go ahead, Jean-Pierre.
Franking hotline.
Franking is actually what we started to talk about today. And I don't think I got to it in any of the classes, but I will deal with it since you specifically asked. Franking is the idea that you have unlimited printing and postage as a member of Congress.